Hello, my name is Dr. Declan Aherne. I'm a clinical psychologist and a Gestalt psychotherapist, and I'm the head of counselling at the University of Limerick for the past 30 years. My talk today is going to be to ask ourselves what it is we want to get from our mindfulness practice. In our work here at the university, we deliver a whole load of programs in groups and individually on mindfulness. And so I thought it might be interesting to explore where we might have some difficulty around our practice of mindfulness. Very briefly to begin with, I just want to explain what mindfulness is about. Mindfulness is simply awareness in the present moment without judgment. It's a very simple idea. It takes a lot of practice, but the idea is that we learn how to be present, mainly through our senses to begin with, so that we can be non-judgmental in our experience of each moment. And through this awareness, we empower ourselves to take charge of our lives, to make decisions carefully about what's appropriate, what's healthy, and not to allow thinking mind to make that a stressful experience for us. So what I want to do in this talk is to help you in getting the most out of your mindfulness practice. But in doing that, we need to recognize that there are certain concerns about the practice of mindfulness. And these concerns would have been first aired nearly 100 years ago by the great psychologist Carl Jung, who studied Eastern psychology, which is the home of mindful practice, and warned Western society against engaging in such practices. In his view, Eastern tradition of yoga and mindfulness practices were very much embedded in the religious and spiritual practices of those cultures. Something that he felt that the Western society was not prepared for, and that in Western society we have a different spiritual heritage. And yet, if we were to listen to Jung's concerns and look at what has happened in the last 50 years in Western society, there seems to be a natural draw towards Eastern traditions, be it yoga and mindful practice in particular in the last number of decades. And that begs the question, why is that the case? Is it that we are attracted to the faraway hills or greener? Or perhaps, what my view is, that we are more drawn towards something that is deeply embedded within our own psyche, and that mindfulness is reminding us of the spiritual heritage of Western cultures, of the Celtic tradition in particular, which is a deep-rooted mystical history. And so for that reason we are drawn towards it. And so in my view, in our culture, I come across many people who are searching and looking. And I ask myself, what is it they're looking for? And it seems that in mindfulness, people seem to have found something. And a little bit like the song goes, I'm not too sure if they found what they're looking for. So let's look a little bit closer at what's actually happening. What we've seen is, in our Western society, formal religious practice more or less being abandoned by the masses, leaving a great void for people to find meaning and purpose. And what seems to be evolving is more of a secular spirituality, which kind of is an oxymoron or a contradiction in terms, perhaps, to many. But this is what's happening nonetheless. And so therefore what we're saying is that our spiritual development from a psychologist's point of view is a very important part of our development. What research has identified for us is that spirituality in fact enhances mental health and well-being. So there's a direct correlation between those who have found meaning and purpose in life and their mental well-being, which is to be lauded. And for this reason, mindfulness has found a place for people that are drawn towards finding some sort of spiritual fulfillment. And now many of you may be saying to yourselves as you listen to me that you're not doing mindfulness for any spiritual purpose or reason whatsoever, which is quite understandable, because mindfulness-based stress reduction is mainly aimed, as the title says, at reducing our stress. What I think we need to understand is that there are two paths of development that mindfulness is possibly addressing. One path, the path that the Eastern Buddhist psychology is geared towards, is that of enlightenment and awakening. The other path is perhaps more in tune with the Western tradition, the Western psychology of personal growth and of strengthening our sense of self, what we might have considered the ego in more traditional terms. So we have these two paths working side by side as part of our development. They're both necessary. The enlightenment path encourages people to move towards a position of letting go of the ego. However, you can't let go of what you don't have. So on the Western side, we have a psychology that is very much devoted to the strengthening of the ego. And so in mindfulness, you have a coming together of these two traditions, where there's an initial development and strengthening of the ego, which normally happens in the first half of our life. And then in the second half of life, Carl Jung would have said, we move more into the spiritual domain of our development. This can happen at different times for different people. What's important is that we recognize how these two traditions need to be merged together respectfully. Something that Ken Wilber, the great American philosopher, referred to as the marriage of sense and soul, whereby we no longer see the scientific element of psychology trying to dominate, manipulate, or captivate what is essentially a very spiritual practice, but that we see that through the psychology of mindfulness and the practice of mindfulness at a psychological level, we're able to strengthen ego so that people feel good about themselves, more accepting of themselves, more able to tolerate and cope with the stresses of life. And then at a certain point in their journey, they reach a stage where they're searching for something more. And many of you who practice mindfulness may have experienced this, that perhaps after a year or two or three of practicing, you'll find you're looking for the next step. And that's where the enlightenment side, the awakening side, the spiritual journey may begin to open up for you. So there you have it in a nutshell. What we're looking at with modern mindfulness practice is a merging of Eastern and Western traditions, where both traditions are respectful of one another. And in my view, this is a very exciting time for research and for psychology in particular, as it explores ways and means of enhancing our well-being, our mental health and well-being, but also being able to incorporate into that an understanding of the importance of our spiritual life. And so if you'd like to learn more about this whole process of mindfulness and what you can learn through mindfulness, be sure to contact us at Student Counselling, the University of Limerick. My name again is Dr. Declan Aherne, and I'm the Head of Counselling.